I love dragons and death, 'cause they are fun.
Hi, it's Tory Torrential. This is Tory Survives Game of Thrones, a blind reading and comedic abridgment of the Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin. We're going through, hopefully, all of the books. Currently, we're on the first book, which is Game of Thrones. We're on chapter 21, which is titled Tyrion 3. And without further ado, the entire high officer staff of the Black Watch has crabs. They were actually shipped and they're pretty succulent, and they came in a snow barrel. But in order to catch you up with what is going on as far as Tyrion, he decided he was going to visit the wall because Jon Snow decided to sign up for the Black. So he traveled up there. He had a couple of bonding moments with Jon Snow, trying to look out for him. And he's also implicated in the murder of Ned Stark's comatose son, who just recently woke up, Bran. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but it is what it is. So they're currently enjoying the crab legs because they're very fresh. And they've just been steamed. They're sitting at the table. And it opens with Jorah Mormont, who's the leader of the Black Watch, big bear of a man, who's decidedly getting up there in years, asking him if he really has to go so soon. Tyrion tells him basically it's overdue and he needs to get back. His brother Jaime is going to assume that he joined the Night's Watch if he stays too much longer. Jorah Mormont says, it's a pity. We'd take you. We need thinkers and witty people. And that's when Tyrion just starts roasting people, apparently, at this dinner. Because he says, well, I'll gather up all the dwarves I see, and I'll send them your way. And it's actually notable that everybody's kind of laughing. I think they're in a good mood because they have the crab, and they're enjoying it. So there's a few chuckles, but Alistair, who I've been saying Alistair, but there's no T, it's Alistair. Alistair Thorne is sitting there just and he's like, the imp mocks us, right? And Tyrion, not ready to take crap from Alistair Thorne, goes, just you. Right? Which I thought was funny. Also, I forgot my iPad, so hold on 1 second. I know. This is just great craft right here. All right. Anyway, so this is just you. And then Alistair basically says, why don't we continue the japes in the yard? Like, since you want to talk so cute. And he's like, why would I go to the yard? The crab's right here. And he's still eating crab while Alistair's trying to call him out. And he's like, no, let's see you say it with some steel in your hand. And he like stands up, And Tyrion is actually like, I have steel in my hand. And he jumps up on his chair and he's stabbing Alistair like in the chest. He's like, do you want a duel? And every time, he counters Alistair, like the rest of the officers are chuckling and laughing harder and stuff. And at this point, he's so mad, like the Jorah Mormont actually starts choking on crab. He has to go like thump him on the back. Alistair like storms out of the room and he like pounds his fist on the table and he's like, to the victor goes the spoils. I claim his share of the crab. And they're still joking a little bit. And, after that, they're like, he's like, you're a wicked man to pick on Alistair like that. And he's like, look, if he paints a target on himself like that, someone's gonna loose an arrow, you know? And they're talking, and he's like, I don't get why you guys have him training knights. He should be mucking your stables and stuff. Mormont is actually like, that's all they send us is stable boys. And before that, he says the guy has no sense of humor. And then Bowen, who we got a little more info on Bowen. I guess he's like a round man. He's kind of red-faced and stuff. He's like, oh, I don't know, if you heard some of the droll names he gives to the boys, you'd know. He has a little bit of a sense of humor. And Tyrion, again, he's like, yeah, I bet the boys have some names for him too. And everybody chuckles again. And then he's like, chip the ice out of your eyes. Like, that guy should not be training kids. He should be mucking stables. And that's when Jorah Mormont is like, that's all he's on us, is like stable boys and sneak thieves and deviants, And at least Alistair is like a real anointed knight. He's one of the few that we actually have. And, Tyrion kind of looks a little bit like, really? And I believe it's Pike. Jeremy Riker, who's another officer, is like, no, it's true. Because Mormont's like, he fought very valiantly in the battle at King's Landing. And Jeremy Riker is like, yeah, but we were on the wrong side. Like, I was up on the battlement with them when Tywin took over. He basically gave us the choice. He was like, look, you can join the Black, or we can put your head on pikes. And Tyrion's just rolling with it because he's like, no offense to your dad. And he's like, no, he's a big fan of heads on pikes and stuff. And, you have like such a noble head. I bet you'd adorn the city prettily. Like, he's just going for everyone. And Jorah Mormont is actually sitting there like, I think maybe Alistair was a little right about you. I think maybe you do mock us in our position up here. And Tyrion kind of offhands it. He's like, everyone needs to be mocked a little bit, because otherwise you take yourself entirely too serious. And then he just segues directly into, might I have some more wine? And they start pouring it. And Bowen, who's a big guy, he's like, you have a big thirst for such a little guy, And that's when Aemon, who is the Maester Aemon, who's blind, he's old, he's kind of tiny. I don't think I mentioned it before, and I don't know why they do this to these poor guys, but I guess all Maesters have a necklace that's like chain links, and it's made of like one of each kind of metal, and it's always described as chafing them. So, but, Aemon is like, oh, I think he's a giant among us. I don't think he's small at all. Like, come to visit. And Tyrion, again, with the verbal, sword fighting, he's like, I've been called a lot of things. I have seldom been called a giant, And Aemon's just like, well, nevertheless, I think it's true. And everybody's just shutting up because Aemon's like over 100. He's like blind. And they're just like, whoa, he's talking, And, Tyrion actually stops for a second. And he's like, well, that's really kind of you, thanks. And then Aemon gets the imp because he's like, I've been called many things in my time, but I've seldom been called kind. And they're like, ha, And then, I guess they run out of crab or whatever, so they start filtering out, and Mormont's like, hold on, I gotta talk to you for a little bit if you don't mind. Like, I got some good booze. And that's pretty much like all Tyrion needs to say. He's like, that's all you had to say, So he's sitting there, and they're drinking kind of a pretty stiff drink, you know, just staving off the cold. And he's like, you know, I kind of worry about you getting out of here because, you know, the north side of the King's Road can be pretty rough. And he's like, oh, you know, I got Jick and Morik and Yoren, you know, one of the White Night's Watch is going to come with me too. So, you know, it's pretty good. And he's like, that's not enough though. I'm going to send you, like, we'll take you to Winterfell. You know, I'll send like 3 guys with you. And Tyrion, actually trying to be a bit of a bro, is like, oh, you think Jon Snow could come? You know, because, like, I bet he'd like to meet his brothers and stuff. And he's like, actually, he's like the one that can't come because at first, like, you kind of got to get these kids to forget their old life. So if he goes and sees his brothers and everything, he's going to hold on and it's going to end up hurting him. And, you know, Tyrion's like, and he's like, you know, I'll send like 3 guys with you though. You have 3 really strong swords, ensuring your safety. And Tyrion kind of senses there's a hook in it a little bit, like he's being too nice. And he's like, okay, well, thank you. And he's kind of waiting for the ask. And Mormont's, and he's like, you know, like sitting there, it gets really awkward. And he's like, if there's anything I can do to return the favor, you know, like kind of prompting him. And he's like, actually, you know, and of course Tyrion's like, oh, I knew it was coming. And he's like, your sister is the queen, you know, your brother-in-law is the king, your brother is you know, the East Ward and all that. Your dad's one of the richest guys ever. Can you talk to them about us? And they're sitting there, and he's just like, you've seen it, man. There's not that many people here. Like, there's only about 600 people in Castle Black. Like, I got like 200 in the Shadow Tower, and there's less than that over on the East Watch, and only a third of those guys are fighting men. Like, if something happened and we got attacked or whatever, I only have about 3 men to defend each mile of the wall. It's about 10,000 leagues long, you know? And Tyrion's like, well, 3 1/3, but I hear you and stuff. And he's like, and to make matters worse, you know, like, Royce came in and he was a knight, and then he insisted on his own command, and I didn't want to tick off his noble father, so I gave him a command, you know? And I gave him, like, Garrett, you know, from chapter 1, I gave him Garrett, who is super veteran, and you know, another capable guy, and they never came back. Garrett deserted. Ned Stark sent me his head. So it was Garrett on the wall, for sure. That's confirmed. And he's like, and then I had to send Benjen out to try to find Royce. And he hasn't come back yet. So I'm wondering who I have to send to go find Benjen. You know, and on top of this, you know, it's like, I'm getting old, man. Like, I can feel it in my bones, like the cold, the chill and stuff when I'm thinking about all this. Because, you know, who's going to replace me? Like, I know who Alistair is and the rest of my officers. And, like, he's just worried that there's, you know, about the state of everything. He's like, we used to build the wall, you know, in the summers and stuff, and get it high, and now we're doing everything that we can do not to die, man. And he's like, you gotta promise me, just tell them the state of things, and you know how bad it is, and that we need bolstering. And you know, Tyrion, he's like, I'll do it, man. And he's a man of his word. Like, he's gonna tell him, but what he doesn't say is like, they're not gonna care. you know, Jamie's gonna laugh, Cersei's gonna be like, so what? Tywin's gonna sniff at the idea of helping him. Like, basically, it ain't going down, you know? And he keeps starting, like, he starts talking again, and he's like, it's been, well, he asked him how many winters he's seen, and he said, like, 9, you know? And I guess winters can last longer than a year and stuff, like the way they count, like it's not necessarily time, it's like the actual season and stuff. And he's like, yeah, we've had this summer, you know, because they say like the longer the summer, the longer the winter. He's like, we've had this summer for like 9 years, man. There's a long winter coming. And Tyrion kind of tries to flippantly play it off. And he's like, well, you know, my nursemaid said if we were really good, we might get an infinite summer. And maybe we've just been being better than we thought. And he's like, you know that's not true. Like, winter is starting, and it's going to be long, and it's going to be hard. You know, and he's basically, like, pleading with him. He's like, look, there's scary stuff, especially in that dark. There's snow bears, there's dire wolves, you know, and it's like, there's some of the fish folk, you know, over, like the fisher folk over in Eastwatch have reported seeing White Walkers on the coast and stuff. And Tyrion actually says, yeah, there's fish folk in, I think he says Lance, that report merfolk, though, you know, like, kind of downplaying it. And he's like, my men keep getting reports that mountain people are running, you know, and trying to get through the wall, and they're succeeding because they're just running for their lives. We don't even know what they're scared of, man. You know? And he's like, look, like, if the long night comes, which I'm guessing the long night is something really bad, he's like, it's just us. Like, we're the whole defense against it and them getting into the kingdom. And right now, man, you know, it's bad. And, you know, Tyrion's kind of like, all right, I heard you. I hear you, man. I got to get up super early in the morning for Yorn, but I will talk to everybody. And he kind of leaves, and he blames Yoren, like, wanting to leave early. But when he's walking out, you know, he kind of sees, like, the frozen guards stuck outside, feels bad for him. So he's like, so I'm sorry. You know, like, and he gets this kind of wild hair about halfway, because he's thinking about, like, man, I hope Morik remembered to warm up my bed and stuff, because I'm freezing, and I need another strong drink that they don't have. And I think he just kind of, like, Mormont got in his head, because it says, like, he feels bad for Mormont, like, while he's, you know, admitting that stuff's kind of falling around him. And he decides, like, he gets this feeling, and he's like, I gotta look off the edge of the world again, you know, like, before I leave, I'm never coming back here and stuff, because he's pretty sure he's never coming back. Like, it's just miserable. He's like, I'm gonna go up there and check it out. And there's a giant wall, and there's this wooden staircase that, like, zigzags all the way up the wall. And he just looks at it. He looks at his little legs. He's like, there's no way I could get up this staircase, but there's this iron cage basically next to it. So he steps in it, and he rings this bell, and he's waiting. And right when he's, like, thinking, like, what the heck am I doing? It kind of, like, jerks up, and he's got to, like, hold on to the bars. And I guess the bars are so cold, he can actually feel them through his gloves. He's like, ooh, this is cold. And he's just kind of getting dragged up. And he notices, like, while he's going, that Morik actually did start a fire in the tower. And when he's looking down on Castle Black, he can see, like, just how bad it's in disrepair and how abandoned it looks and stuff. They also mention he can see, I guess there's a village close enough that he can see, like, the fires and stuff. It's called Mole's Town, which is slightly south of Castle Black. So there's villagers within sight if you're higher than the towers. But, he's just going up. And then when he gets up there, all he hears is like, oh man, it's the dwarf, because it's the two winchmen that had to pull him up, via the winch. And they're like, all right, get him out of there. And the one guy like kind of grabs the cage and pulls it over and opens the door, and he gets out and he's like, what do you want? And he's like, I wanted to see the wall one last time before I left. And he's like, all right, fine, just don't fall off. And I guess it's really wide, so like he's not super worried about falling off, but they throw like crushed rocks, kind of like gravel on top of the snow, and then as everybody walks on it, it melts the snow and kind of levels out, so it's kind of slick, and then they gotta add more basically. But that's more or less what he's dealing with. Like, it's not super sure footing, but he has a lot of space, like if he were to slip or whatever. So he just he's standing there and he's like, okay, west or east or west? And he's like, I'm gonna go west. And he just starts walking west, and it's cold, and he doesn't want to slow down because it's freaking cold up there, and the wind's going. And he's worried, like, if he stops, because someone's like, who goes there? Halt, And he's like, if I halt too long, John, I'm gonna freeze. And that's when Ghost, pads up to him and starts sniffing him. He's just like, why you on the wall? And John basically does the same thing. He walks up and he's like, why are you on the wall? And Tyrion is like, oh, well, I wanted to give it one last look and everything. And he's like, this is the last place I thought I'd find you. And he's like, this is the last place I thought I'd be, but here we are. And John's like, he's like, why are you up here? And he's like, I got night duty again. And then John's like, I've got night duty every night since, Alistair decided he didn't like me. And he thinks he's gonna catch me falling asleep during morning drills, because they're keeping me up half the night. But he hasn't got me yet. And, the imp kind of smiles a little bit. He's like, meh, all right. And he's like, and can Ghost juggle? Like joking around. And he's like, not yet, but, Gren actually held his own against Haldor this morning. And Pip doesn't drop his sword nearly enough. And he's like, Pip. And he's like, oh, yeah, Pipper. We call him Pip, the little small guy with the big ears and stuff. And if you remember when he describes him, he used his sword like a dagger. And he's like, Alistair didn't even teach Pip how to hold a sword properly, So he's like, but hey, can we keep walking? Because I got to guard this entire part of the wall. And they told me that my blood would freeze unless I keep walking, but they didn't tell me, how fast. Because basically, it's like, I will, but you got to match pace with me. Like, I'm not matching your pace. And he's like, okay, well, I guess I can walk it slow, right? And I think Tyrion feels a little bad. He's like, hey, if you got any like messages or something, like you want to send word home, and I'll send words and stuff. And John is just kind of like, okay, first off, I need you to tell Rob that I'm taking over command of the Night's Watch so I can keep him safe, so he doesn't have to practice sword fighting anymore. He can just go ahead and practice sewing and melt his sword down, have Mickey melt his sword down for horseshoes, and it's all good. Right? And Tyrion's like, he's a lot bigger than me. I don't think I'm gonna tell him that. And then John's like, all right, fair enough. Well, Lil Rickon, he's probably gonna ask you where I am, and if you can, maybe explain it a little bit to him. But when he gets sad, tell him he can have all my stuff until I get back. That'll make him happy. and Tyrion doesn't really feel comfy. And he's like, this could be sent by Crow and stuff. And Jon's like, Rickon can't read, man. So he's like, all right, I'll do it. And he's like, and Bran, I don't know what to say to Bran. Like, I'm kind of at a loss, but if you could, like, could you just help Bran? And Tyrion's like, how am I supposed to help him? Like, I'm not magic. I'm not a maester. Like, I can't make his legs work and stuff. And it's kind of touching because Jon's like, well, I mean, you got words, though. Like, you helped me when I needed it. And, he's like, all right, I'll tell you what. I will try to find some words to help Bran, as best I can. But it's going to be bad because, you're asking, like, you're asking a lame to help a cripple. It's going to be grotesque. And Jon's like, I believe in you, basically. He's like, I'll do it. And then Jon really surprises Tyrion because he's just kind of like, friends, and just officially like offers him an actual hand of friendship. And Tyrion is just like, he's kind of touched. He's like, oh man. And he like pulls off his glove, just like Jon. Sorry. Pulls off his glove just like Jon. And he's like, well, most of my compatriots are bastards. And he like shakes his hand and he's like, friends. So they're like friends, which is another reason why I don't think he had anything to do with Bran. He just agreed to try to help Bran. He just embraced Jon in friendship. And after they do that, like, he doesn't even just leave. Like, they walk to the edge of the wall and they're looking out, and he's noticing, that they keep a barrier of, I think maybe like a mile, but it feels shorter, like 100 yards, something. But there's like a strip, in between the woods and the wall. And I guess other places on the wall that aren't by the forts aren't as, separated anymore because they're low on men. But Castle Black needs so much firewood and stuff. So there's just like the wall, nothing, so you can see anybody coming up. And then the woods. But he says the woods feel almost like another wall because they're like ancient and they're old. Nobody's ever been in them. From like his estimate, they're just dark. The moonlight doesn't even come through. It's just blackness. And he's like, I absolutely get why they call it like the haunted, scary woods. And he starts getting bad feelings, and he actually even starts like kind of regretting like all the jokes he said about like snarks and grumpkins and stuff, because he's like, yeah, like there could be some serious bad stuff in these woods, like it's one thing to like have a mental picture. It's another thing to actually stare at them and be like, whoa, and that kind of dawns on him, and he's like, those jokes feel kind of droll now. Like, maybe I shouldn't have made them. But Jon is kind of talking as you do, in the middle of the night. They're just buddying down, and he's like, the first night I was there, I expected my Uncle Ben to come back. Like, I thought I would be the one to blow the horn and actually get him, signal his return, and he just never came. And I've been standing here, and he's just never coming, And the imp, I guess, I don't know if he's like trying to pacify the situation or he's trying to make him feel better, but he's like, just give him time, And Jon's like, I will a little, but if he doesn't show up before too long, me and Ghost are gonna go find him. Basically, like, he's like, I'm gonna get my Uncle Ben back. And Tyrion's like, right on. And in his head, though, he's kind of like, and then who's gonna come find you? you know, like, because I think Tyrion's kind of getting the sense that like something really bad's in the woods, and that's kind of where the chapter fades out as it is. So like, in summation, the Black Watch is a fraction of what it was. It's starting to crumble from the lack of people, you know, in it. And my AirPod just tried to escape, so sorry about that. This is my first time trying to use them as the microphone. Hopefully that works a little better. Mormont desperately needs backup. He told Tyrion as much. Tyrion's going to try to relay the information. Everybody's getting bad feelings on the watch. Alistair is out to get Jon. Jon is trying to persevere in the face of that, although he's really getting ready to get reckless and go after his Uncle Benjen if he has to, because he's super worried and he's still missing, along with Royce, which we know what happened to Royce, and that's not good because he got chopped up by White Walkers. And there's no real hint of guilt or deception from Tyrion talking to Jon, even talking about Bran. So I'm just not sure he was involved in the plot. It just reads wrong to me. And basically, one other thing I keep forgetting to mention is Jorah Mormont has a pet raven that is super snarky and manages to copy exactly the wrong word when somebody says something in order to like stir the pot. And it's trained and he feeds it corn and stuff. But like, you know, when Alistair is like, you know, I challenge you to a duel, like, you know, the little raven's like, duel, you know. And that's been going on this entire time. And I like that raven. He's like snarky. He's like the Chandler of the group. And I just forgot to mention him. So this was Tory Survives Game of Thrones, Chapter 21, Tyrion 3. I'm Tory Torrential. You are hopefully partially amused, maybe. And I love you.
Thanks for watching my show. Like and subscribe.